What do you think of the cabinet, Mr. Chrystia?
It's a good cabinet.
Appointing a deputy prime minister, though, Mr. Freeland, I think you had.
I had one all the time. I had Sheila Copps. I had Herb Gray. I had John Manley. It's useful.
There's a familiar face. Former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien was on Parliament Hill today, where Justin Trudeau's new cabinet was meeting. One of the biggest changes in that cabinet is Chrystia Freeland's move from Foreign Affairs Minister to Deputy Prime Minister. So what exactly does the job entail? Freeland is only the 10th Deputy Prime Minister in Canadian history. The role was created in 1977 when Pierre Trudeau bestowed the title on Alan MacEachen. It's an honorary title with no standing in law and no formal duties, but in cabinet it makes you number 2 and the Prime Minister's stand-in when needed, like presiding over cabinet meetings or fending off attacks from the opposition in question period. Beyond that, the Prime Minister may assign specific tasks in conjunction with the title, according to the Prime Minister's office. Pierre Trudeau wrote in 1993 that MacEachen had a very good strategic sense and was always a source of shrewd advice. Brian Mulroney's Deputy Prime Minister, Don Mazankowski, was more active, running day-to-day operations of government. Under Jean Chrétien, John Manley was responsible for Canada's response to the September 11th terrorist attacks. And Freeland? She'll try to forge a better relationship between Ottawa and disgruntled prairie provinces. John Manley served as Deputy Prime Minister as well as Foreign Affairs, Finance and Industry Minister in the Chrétien government. He's now a Senior Business Advisor with Bennett Jones and joins me in studio. Hi, Mr. Manley.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful to see you, as always. Let me start off with a question that came about yesterday as soon as Chrystia Freeland was named to the role of Deputy Prime Minister, and that is one of latitude. How much latitude will she have? How much power will the Prime Minister give her? How much latitude did you have as Deputy Prime Minister?
Well, first of all, I negotiated it because I actually turned the job down twice, and then I said to Mr. Chrétien that, look, I don't want a title. I mean, I need to have a job. Like, I don't want to be spending my time going to the airport to meet dignitaries or going off to foreign funerals. So he gave me a series of jobs. I told Catherine McKenna I was the first Minister of Infrastructure. I was Minister of Crown Corporations. I chaired 3 cabinet committees. I was counterpart to the Homeland Security Advisor in the White House, Governor Ridge, all of which came under my ambit. So basically, the job is what the Prime Minister determines it to be. And in my experience, the key thing there was that I was in the Prime Minister's morning meetings every day with the Clerk of the Privy Council and with his Chief of Staff. I saw all the paper that went across the Prime Minister's desk, and I was fully informed on what was going on. So it became much more than a title. It was a real job.
Before I ask you a bit more about the title or the role, why did you turn it down twice?
Because I was afraid. First of all, I was Foreign Minister, and I loved it. And I felt like it was important work that I was still coming up the learning curve. I had been disrupted by 9/11 in my case. And I just didn't want to move out of a meaty, important, significant role that I was, still mastering in order to take on what? I mean, you're not the Vice President of the United States. You don't get the job if the guy dies, right? You're just another minister, only you don't actually, unless the Prime Minister gives you defined things, you don't even have any money to spend. I mean, that's the most powerless minister in the government.
I can't help but notice the parallels between your move from Foreign Affairs and wondering what exactly the role entails, and Chrystia Freeland. She's moving also from a very meaty file that involved NAFTA and Donald Trump over to the Deputy Prime Minister role, also Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. Do you think that will help define the role overall? I think so. I don't know what the conversations have been. I don't know if she's given access to what the Prime Minister hears and knows and sees. Don't know what support she's getting in the Privy Council office. She is chairing the Economic Policy Committee. I think that's a good outlet. But the role of intergovernmental affairs can be really, really meaty, or it can be, just bearing messages and taking the brunt of criticism. I mean,
I think she set a very good tone yesterday by talking about listening. I think that's important. How long she'll have tolerance for listening, need I name any premiers that are particularly hard to listen to in terms of their views of the federal government? Probably not, but you can think of who I might be thinking of.
What do you think of the scope of the challenge in front of her, particularly because she's tasked with intergovernmental affairs at a time that you just referenced? There are great animosities between various premiers and the federal government, and there are great concerns from people in certain parts of the country about the outcome of this election. How great is the challenge in front of her?
Well, it's an enormous challenge. The role of the Prime Minister in Canada has always been focused on national unity, but we usually think of that as Quebec, and now it's Western Canada. The difference is Quebec, because of its history, because of its language and culture, had its own distinctiveness. Western Canada, these are economic issues. And rightly or wrongly, people in Western Canada have come to the belief that Ottawa doesn't understand the nature of their economy and is not attuned to the needs that they have. And instead of trying to help them develop their economy and succeed, puts obstacles in their way. So she has to, I think rhetoric will only get you so far. The government is going to have to define some very specific things, and she will need to shape those, and she'll need to work with a variety of ministers, Minister of Infrastructure, the Minister of Transport, the Minister of Natural Resources. They are all going to have to figure out what are the specific things that we can do to rebuild some trust and confidence in Western Canada, not because it will help them win an election. Like, the Liberals are not going to sweep Alberta no matter what they do. But national unity is important, and toning down the anger and sense of frustration and ensuring that people believe that they are part of a bigger entity than their province or their municipality is going to be very important.
You served as Minister of Finance, rather. You've also served in the capacity as the head of the Business Council of Canada. I looked through the cabinet list yesterday, and there were like 6 or 7 other ministries that intersected with finance: middle-class prosperity now, economic development, rural economic development. When you think about the future of this economy or the headwinds that face the economy more largely right now, what do you want to see from this government? I know you had some frustrations over the last 4 years. What do you want to see?
Well, not just over the last 4 years, I'd say over the last 10 years that I was at the Business Council.
Very
so
true.
It hasn't been partisan, it's been multi-partisan, bipartisan. I think what I didn't hear in the election campaign was any talk about how we grow the economy. Everyone's all for middle-class prosperity, largely because most of us define ourselves as middle class. But I think it's important to make the pie bigger, not just give a segment of society a bigger piece of the pie, keeping it at a constant size. And so, rather than only talking about matters that are redistributive, we have to talk about how we grow the pie, how we grow the economy. And that requires looking at our overall competitiveness. It requires that we make real efforts to open new trade markets. We've got to diversify away from our concentration on the U.S. And actually, we have to diversify from some of our reliance on China, which had been our major diversification target. So there's a lot to do. And when you look at a province like Alberta, that's the time to spend on infrastructure. When the rest of the economy is weak, there are workers available. There are definite public needs. That's the time. I hope Catherine McKenna sees that as one of her priorities. Get in there and do things. And we'll talk about the rhetoric and the Canada Pension Plan and all these other things another day. Do things, and I think Albertans will respond to it.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Manley.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Great to have you here. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.